Most people think they know what capitalism is built on. Free markets, small government. The idea that if everyone chases their own interest, the system will somehow find its way on its own. And when you ask where this idea comes from, almost always the same name appears: Adam Smith, the father of economics, the symbol of the free market, the pioneer of the let-it-be-done mindset. But here there's a small, actually not so small problem. Adam Smith never believed in the version of capitalism that is defended in his name today. And the irony is this: the people who use his name the most today are exactly the people Smith warned us about. Welcome to history and economics, to the place where money, power, and history intersect, and to a world where nothing is as simple as it looks. Before we get to the invisible hand, let's take a step back, because most of us have never actually heard what Adam Smith really said. And that's not our fault. Over the last century, such a powerful story has been written using Smith's name that it's now accepted almost as a natural truth. That story says this: the state should not interfere. Markets should be free. Competition will bring prosperity to everyone anyway. Later they called this laissez-faire. In other words, let it be. But this is exactly where the problem begins. Adam Smith never said these things. He didn't glorify free markets. He didn't praise greed. He never said, everything will fix itself. If he were alive today, he would probably ask this question: who turned my book into this, and where did my warnings go? Let's look at the real Adam Smith. He was born in 1723 in Scotland. A harsh geography, tough conditions, limited opportunities. Britain at the time was not some free market paradise. On the contrary, everything was in the hands of monopolies. Trade was run through royal privileges. Guilds set prices. Giant companies acted like states. This was the world Smith studied. And in this world, he saw one thing very clearly: power corrupts when it concentrates. That's why he said, when people engaged in the same trade come together, it usually ends against the interests of society. In plain terms, when big players sit at the table, the public usually pays the price. Another important point: Adam Smith was not an economist. He was a moral philosopher. He tried to understand why people act fairly, and why sometimes they don't care at all. Before The Wealth of Nations, he wrote The Theory of Moral Sentiments. That book says something very clearly. A society cannot survive on self-interest alone. It needs a bit of conscience, a bit of responsibility, and a few limits. And now let's come to the phrase everyone knows: the invisible hand. Everyone has heard of it, but most people don't know this. Adam Smith used this phrase only 3 times in his entire life. 3, and none of those uses mean the market corrects itself. In the first, he talks about people attributing unexplained events to gods. In the second, he describes a merchant keeping his money at home out of fear. In the third, he explains how the rich, despite their greed, are forced to leave crumbs for the poor simply because they can't consume everything themselves. So Smith's invisible hand is this: superstition, fear, and the limits of gluttony. Not a sacred law and not the engine of the economy. But over time, this small metaphor turned into a massive dogma. Industrial giants, big corporations, and politicians loved this idea because it removed responsibility. Saying the market will handle it became the perfect excuse to avoid accountability. Smith, however, was saying the opposite. Monopolies are dangerous. When corporations get too close to politics, the system breaks. Sometimes the state has to intervene. So what do we see when we look around today? Technology giants that control information. Companies that grow by crushing their competitors. Financial institutions whose collapse makes everyone pay the bill. These are not free markets. These are games where the powerful write the rules. This is exactly the world Adam Smith feared. But knowing this doesn't have to be depressing. On the contrary, it brings clarity. Smith didn't think the economy was destiny. It was human-made, and if it was broken, it could be fixed. What he argued for was balance. Markets strong enough to produce, states strong enough to set limits, and societies that demand fairness. Adam Smith never said, the invisible hand will save us. What he said was this: we have to save ourselves. History doesn't repeat itself exactly, but if you don't understand it, you'll still end up under the same mistakes. If this narrative gave you a different perspective, subscribe. History has answers. I'll show you where to find them.